Hey Language Luminaries, welcome back to another session, and today I want you to understand the parameters which I will quote as a reference, and I want my substantial evidence, that is my channel, to be quoted as a reference where I received a feedback related to the references which I quoted as a playlist and the itineraries which are quoted in the playlist, which is related to the parameters, that is the sattvic nutrition which my viewers have to follow, or the followers have to respond as a itinerary and not as a reference. I'm happy to announce that my health is not put it as a reference but as a medium, and the shorts which I upload is in place with the playlist, that is daily English boost for Language Luminaries, and I want to thank my viewers for quoting themselves as their references to me. And today I want my references to be quoted as Happy New Year and 2026 to be referred to you with the terms and the names which I will quote as a reference to my ideology. And I want to thank Abhini K as a reference to the feedback which I've received. Dwani R as a reference which is quoted as a feedback, where the content which I quoted and the feedback which I've received related to the series which I've uploaded, that is the Interview Intelligence Master series, and she quoted the reference that I correct the narration during the reference and not during the portfolio which I've quoted in her itinerary. And I want the Language Luminary series, that is to elevate your communication podcast series, to be quoted as a reference, especially the itineraries which I've quoted and the references which I will quote have referred to the podcast series which I quoted to speak smart and succeed fast as a reference to the itineraries which I've quoted, and the names which I'm quoting will be quoted as a reference, that is Joseph K, Jennifer R, and Jennifer T, to be quoted as a performer, and the performance should be quoted as a performer of the month in the categories which I quote as a reference, that is communication with the reference which are quoted in Smart English Mode as a language luminary who can communicate the references and not as a paramount in their subsidiary. I want the references to be quoted again to the ideology and the reference to be quoted to me as a paramount and not as a vertical. And today I want to thank my audience for conducting their surveillance on the mechanism. And the topic for today is words that shape careers, clarity, confidence, and conscious communication. And I want my language luminaries to understand that this space was created with one clear intention: to help you think clearly, speak confidently, and move forward with purpose. When I began this journey as a career counselor, and the conduction which I'm quoting, that is rupees 3000, to be quoted as a reference to the portfolios which I quote as Silent Infusions in Instagram and Shruti Mandir in Twitter, and LinkedIn to be quoted as my name, Shruti MN, as a influencer YouTuber from the past and YouTuber from the past 7 months, with a vertical which should be quoted as a mechanism. I want my experience from 2009 to be quoted as a reference to the research which I've conducted on the journaling and mechanism protocol, and I want you to speak your vertical as an articulation and not as a feedback. When I began this journey, I realized something deeply important, or quoted as a preference, that is the depth in the profound narration. Most career setbacks are not caused by lack of intelligence but by lack of articulation under pressure. Today's session begins together everything this playlist represents: grammar, mindset, interview readiness, and inner clarity. I want the communication as a segment to be quoted as a reference as why communication decides career. In interviews and professional conversations, clarity is currency. The way you structure a sentence often determines how your competence or the competency should be quoted as the reference and not as the paramount. When you're pronouncing the words, it should be quoted as a reference, that is competency, and competency as a pronunciation with the syllable is perceived. For example, I think I might be suitable for this role is incorrect. My skills align well with this role and I am prepared to deliver results should be quoted as a reference. And I repeat, as a correct statement, my skills align well with this role and I am prepared to deliver results. My skills align with confidence cannot be considered as a paramount. The difference is not vocabulary, it is conviction. This channel exists to help you place uncertainty with assurance. And I want my reference to be quoted as a paramount with the itineraries which are quoted, and there are subscribers who are part of my itinerary, and I want you to refer my recent post where I have tagged my references as a paramount and as a vertical to be quoted as a profile from LinkedIn and a LinkedIn, and as a reference to be quoted that the pronunciation should be corrected according to the circumstantial evidence, that is your family member or a mother who can, or a family entity as a narration to be quoted as a background narration. The reason is my father's entity is quoted as a reference, and yesterday I was happy with the narrations which were quoted to me, and I want to quote the references as congratulations to the itineraries as well, and the subscribers who are quoted in the reference should be quoted as Bruno and Sohag, and the reference shouldn't be quoted as a surname, and the mistakes that we make during the references should be quoted as a narration and not as a representation. I request the viewers to read the names with clarity and not with the confidence, which I will quote as a narration as well, and I want the narration to be quoted as a paramount, and the references which I quote should be narrated as a paramount in my itinerary, and the references which I will quote will be quoted as a narration. The second part of the session, that is the segmentation, which will be quoted as a reference to segments as grammar as a thinking tool. Grammar is not about rules, it is about reasoning. When you learn sentence structure, you train your mind to think in sequence, logic and intention. Grammar improves with conviction, and interview responses are leadership, communication and emotional control under pressure. Language disciplines thought, and disciplined thought builds confident professionals. I want the segmentation of the third category to be quoted as emotional intelligence in expression. Many of you have shared that nervousness, self-doubt and fear of judgment hold you back. Here's a truth I have learned as a career counselor. Confidence is not about the absence of fear, it is the presence of preparation. When you know how to frame your ideas, fear loses its power. The reason every lesson here connects with language and emotional stability is quoted as a reference to the next segment. That is the segment which will be quoted as a narration. If I have not, I treated the formulated evidence as career with interview preparation. I want my segment, that is the next segment, to be quoted as a reference, that is interview reality check, as a reference to your itineraries. Interviewers do not look for perfection, they listen for clarity, accountability, and composure. Strong candidates do not over explain, they state, support, and stop. That is the communication muscle we build here step by step. I want to thank my subscribers for referring the circumstantial evidence, and the next segment is related to the gratitude to subscribers, family, and friends. At this point, I want to pause, not to teach but to thank. To every subscriber who chose to trust this channel, thank you. Your comments, likes, and support matter more than you know. To my family who believed in this vision, even before it had a name, thank you for your patience and strength. To my friends who encouraged me when growth felt slow, your faith kept me steady. This channel is not built alone, it is built with collective belief. If these sessions helped you to speak with clarity, think with structure, or walk into an interview with more confidence, then this journey is already meaningful. Stay consistent, stay curious, and remember, your words decide your direction. In Smart English World, master words, elevate confidence, transform careers. As a paramount in the references, I will answer a few questions which is quoted as a comment. Which phrase do you overuse that weakens your professional voice? As a paramount in this itinerary, I want to quote the phrase as a professional identity and the fillers to be quoted as a reference to the expressions, and the examples to be quoted as a narration, that is, you have to start with the opening sentence as welcome to the itinerary and not as greetings. How does your body language change when you speak with certainty? And I want the reference to be quoted as a narration, and I want my health to be quoted as a paramount, as blessings to the narration with gratitude. That the body language which I'm quoting as a reference is certainty and not as a preference in the itinerary. And I want you to place your circumstantial proof by placing the subscribe button as a proficiency in the language, and proficiency should be quoted as proficiency only if the reference is quoted as proficiency. What is one sentence you could rewrite today to sound more assertive? I want my narrative statements to be quoted as a reference and as a paramount in the itineraries, where I will put the references to be quoted as a narration and not as a reference in the itinerary. I want the privilege to be quoted as a fortitude in the equanimous identity, and I want the technically acumen language to be quoted as a barrier in the Sattvic Nutrition Diet series, which I've quoted as a narration. Do you explain too much or state too little in interviews? I want this narration to be quoted as a statement without interruptions, and I want the statements to be quoted as a narrative and normative statements. How does grammar influence the way you organize thoughts under pressure? I want the narration to be quoted as a fifth identity, that is the fifth question or the answers to be quoted in the comments. And if you want a live session where I can quote this pressure, the topic pressure, as a reference and not this pressure, even in the interview, and the academic profession which you quote as a growth in your personal life or professional life, can be quoted as a reference. I want the narration to be quoted as an organized mechanism by making a note of your references in a diary and refer the communication and the gaps which you quote as a preference. And I want my narration to be quoted as a barrier in the network if it is not referred to you. I want you to like, share and subscribe to my channel by quoting the narrations even as a post on LinkedIn. I want my number, that is 80500330007, to be quoted as a narrative statement and not as a normative functionality. And I want your feedback to be quoted as a personal message and as a feedback which can be quoted in a post platform where you can quote the harassment or the medium, which can be quoted as a reference to the narration and not as a statement. For example, to be quoted as a statement in the narrative conduction. What emotion most disrupts your communication? Fear, doubt, or haste? I want the narration to be quoted as a vertical in the answer, where you can quote your fear, doubt, or haste to be quoted as a reference and not as a normative functionality. How can silence be used as a strength in professional conversation? I want this to be quoted as a paramount in the itineraries which I will quote as a normative functionality, and I will post my narrations to you as comments after I receive the feedback from your itineraries. Which interview question makes you most uncomfortable and why? I want the narrative statement to be quoted as a normative functionality, where the statement should be quoted as celebration with the itineraries. How often do you replace I think with evidence-based statements? I want the narration to be quoted with the videos which is quoted as reference, and fillers to be quoted as mechanism, and gaps to be quoted as statements. And as a vertical to all the answers which I'm quoting as the references to every and all to be quoted as all in the mechanism. What does clarity mean to you in words and in mindset? The words which we repeat as fillers in the gaps which we quote as reference should be quoted as a normative functionality. How can disciplined language improve leadership presence? I want the narration to be quoted to you as a paramount in the routine which you quote with the diet plan or the podcast series which is quoted as a narration in the mechanism, and the present should be quoted as a formulated evidence. What commitment can you make this week to improve your communication? I want the narration to be quoted as a paramount, and the statement should be quoted as a firm conviction, where I can quote the narration with the paramount and the issues in the network to be quoted as a connectivity barrier. This journey is built on belief, mine, yours, and the quiet strength of family and friends who stood by me. Every subscriber is not a number, but a reminder that clarity matters, learning matters, and growth is possible. Thank you for walking this path with me.